5. The last HELE. Throughout World War II, the British shot down a large number of German bombers. But these wrecks remain curiously absent from the landscape today. Most of the destroyed planes ended up in the water surrounding the British Isles, where they occasionally reappear. One of the only 2 remaining German wrecks that can be found on land in the United Kingdom is a rare HELE 111 that sits on a remote landmass in northern Scotland's Shetland Islands. Known as Fair Isle, it's Britain's most isolated inhabited island, with a population of just 48 residents. Today, it's one of those blink and you miss it type of places. But during the war, it was home to an important Royal Air Force radar station, and the Shetlands served as a vital outpost to the British war effort. Using specifically modified bombers, German pilots routinely flew over the area to collect information that could be used for their own purposes. They also occasionally attacked Fair Isle and other military locations throughout the region. On January 17, 1941, the HELE 111 was shot down during a routine weather reconnaissance mission. It crash-landed at Wasseter, killing 2 of its crew members. 3 surviving crew members were promptly put under citizen's arrest by residents who lived nearby. 2 days later, and after multiple failed attempts to reach Fair Isle, an RAF mission arrived and took the prisoners to Shetland. The plane's pilot, Heinz Thurs, survived the accident, which happened on his 21st birthday. During the late 1980s, he returned to the site where he met with some of the locals who were present at the time of the crash. As of 2007, both of HELE's engines remained at the crash site, along with a large section of its tail and fuselage. 4. EgyptAir 990. EgyptAir Flight 990 provided regular passenger service from Los Angeles International Airport to Cairo, with a stop at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City. During the early morning hours of Halloween on October 31, 1999, a Boeing 767 that was flying the route inexplicably crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, roughly 60 miles south of Nantucket Island off Cape Cod, Massachusetts. All 217 passengers and crew members perished, making it the deadliest EgyptAir accident of all time, and the second deadliest crash involving a 767 aircraft. The plane had taken off from JFK at 1:20 in the morning. At 1:44 a.m., it reached its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. 4 minutes later, the captain, veteran pilot Ahmed El Habashi, went to use the restroom. During his short time away from the cockpit, both of the engine's throttles were moved to idle. The aircraft quickly entered an increasingly steep dive, causing a feeling of weightlessness throughout the cabin and undoubtedly sending the passengers into a sheer panic. Despite the chaos, Captain El Habashi managed to re-enter the cockpit. As he struggled to regain control of the plane, it reached its maximum descent rate of 39,000 feet per minute, bringing it dangerously close to breaking the sound barrier and pushing the 767's frame far past its design limits. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, the Relief First Officer, Gamil al-Batouti, cut off the fuel supply to the plane's engines. A few moments later, Captain El-Habashi pushed both throttles to their maximum position, but with no fuel supply, his efforts were futile. He managed to slow the plane's dive using the speed brakes, but the electric went out, causing the flight recorders to stop recording. Investigators were forced to rely on radar data and the distribution of wreckage to figure out what happened next. Based on the limited information available, they learned that the plane entered a steep climb for about 40 seconds, most likely as a result of the crew's attempts to pull the 767 out of the dive. After ascending from 16,000 feet to 25,000 feet, the plane entered another steep dive, one that the crew was unable to recover from. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and the Egyptian Ministry of Aviation's Egyptian Civil Aviation Agency both struggled to come up with an explanation for the crash, which happened during a non-critical part of the flight that appeared to be going normally until it suddenly began plummeting toward the ocean. As far as anyone could tell, nothing was mechanically wrong with the plane. The NTSB concluded that the first relief officer Gamil al-Batouti's flight control inputs caused the crash. But the why part of the case remains unexplained to this day. In its report, the agency did not rule out the possibility that al-Batouti deliberately crashed the plane. The ECAA denied that this was the case, But the truth is that nobody knows what was going on in Albatuti's mind. Any reasons he may have had for causing the plane to malfunction, whether deliberate or unintentional, were taken with the pilot to his watery grave. Hey, real quick, we just wanted to say thanks for watching American Eye. Let us know in the comments what else you'd like to learn about, and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 3. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. On October 13, 1972, 19 rugby players boarded a chartered plane in the Uruguayan capital of Montevideo, with 21 family members and friends for a game in Santiago, Chile. When the flight failed to reach its destination on time, authorities launched a search. The effort was called off after 8 days. It would later be discovered that searchers had flown over it multiple times without noticing it. 72 days later, a pair of survivors approached some herdsmen in a remote region of the Andes and asked for help. They had trekked 38 miles on foot from the wreck site. Once authorities were notified, they sprang into action to plot a rescue plan. Over the following 2 days, they saved 14 more survivors from the crash site. Officials were shocked to learn that the plane had turned for its final descent 40 miles before it was supposed to. It struck a mountain in the eastern Andes, causing its wings and tail to shear off before the fuselage barreled down the slope at 220 miles per hour. It eventually came to rest along the mountainside at an elevation of 11,710 feet. 12 people died immediately. The survivors struggled to stay warm in the fuselage while awaiting rescue that never came. Over the following days and weeks, many more succumbed to their injuries and the brutal cold. By the time authorities called off the search 8 days later, they had completely run out of food. They tried to eat leather and cotton from the plane's seats, but it made them sick. The ensuing discussions could likely be described as being beyond most people's worst nightmare. After multiple heated disagreements about how to stay alive, the remaining survivors finally agreed that if they died, it was appropriate for the others to eat their body in order to avoid starving to death. As you can imagine, they were horrified by the mere thought, but their only choices were to die or eat their dead. By the time help came nearly 2.5 months later, 13 more people had died in addition to the 12 who perished in the crash. Authorities burned the fuselage and buried the deceased at the site in a mass grave, which is marked by a plaque and a cross to memorialize the lives lost. But the burning question of why the plane turned when it wasn't supposed to lingered. An investigation ultimately concluded that an inexperienced co-pilot was at the controls when he mistakenly turned for the aircraft's final descent long before he should have. 2. Philippine Air Force C-130 crash. On July 4, 2021, a Lockheed C-130 Hercules took off from the Philippine city of Cagayan de Oro with 104 members of the country's Air Force and 5 military vehicles on board. While attempting to land at HELE Airport in the province of Sulu at 11:30 that morning, the plane overshot the runway. It crashed into a nearby wooded area and burst into flames, prompting a military search that was carried out with the assistance of local residents who immediately sprang into action to help after witnessing the collision. 50 military personnel perished in the crash, including the pilot, along with 3 civilians on the ground, making it the Philippine Air Force's deadliest aviation accident of all time and the country's worst air disaster in 30 years. It took more than 2 months for authorities to identify all the victims. 46 of the aircraft's occupants survived with injuries, along with 4 civilians on the ground. Most of the personnel on the plane were recent Air Force graduates who were on their way to participate in counterinsurgency operations against Abu Sayyaf, an Islamic separatist group based in and around the city of HELE. Witnesses reported seeing people jumping out of the aircraft before it hit the ground, but it's unclear whether the decision spared them from the deadly blaze or cost them their lives. Horrifying photos of the wreck that appeared in the news showed the mangled C-130 in pieces and engulfed in flames while thick black smoke rose above the surrounding coconut palms. Based on the imagery and word of mouth, rumors circulated rapidly in the initial aftermath of the crash. Despite caution by the Philippine Department of National Defense, and the military against jumping to conclusions and spreading potentially false information while an investigation was carried out. After ruling out the possibility of an attack by another aircraft, but still lacking definitive answers, investigators retrieved the plane's flight recorder and voice cockpit recorder and sent them to experts in the United States for analysis. The findings failed to pinpoint a single cause for the crash, which is pretty rare in an era of advanced technology, and considering the intensive scrutiny that follows when an air disaster occurs almost anywhere throughout the world. A report by the Armed Forces of the Philippines blamed a combination of material, human, and environmental factors. The explanation is somewhat vague, stating that the crash was most probably due to actual or perceived material factors and induced human factors which were aggravated by local and environmental conditions. In simple terms, the findings speculate that the crew's response to these actual or perceived factors caused the plane to stall irreversibly. Exactly what those factors may have been remains a mystery to this day. 1. BSAA Star Tiger. After World War II, passenger air travel skyrocketed. To accommodate the growing number of commercial travelers, numerous British bombers were hastily converted into passenger airliners. Included among them was a Lancaster bomber with the gun turrets removed, known as the Avro Tudor 4. On the morning of January 28, 1948, 25 passengers and 6 crew members were forced to wait at the airport in Lisbon, Portugal, for 2.5 hours when one of these planes, dubbed the Star Tiger, ran into some engine trouble. The aircraft was scheduled to travel to Bermuda following a 75-minute refueling stop in the Azores, but was further delayed at Santa Maria when the captain, Brian W. McMillan, decided that the weather was too poor to continue on to the final destination. He decided to wait until the next day. The weather was still inclement the next morning, but after being delayed for more than a day, McMillan decided to take off for Bermuda despite strong winds. To avoid getting caught up in the worst of it, he flew no higher than 2,000 feet and kept in regular contact with another pilot who had flown out an hour ahead and agreed to provide weather updates. The Star Tiger was lashed by heavy winds and rain, but the flight seemed to go as planned for the first 10 hours. When McMillan realized that the wind had blown the plane about 60 miles off course, it was past the point of no alternative, which means that there was no closer airport to divert to if something went wrong. In other words, the crew had no choice but to continue on toward Bermuda. McMillan followed the navigator's instructions, which sent the Star Tiger directly into a gale, but should have enabled it to land at its destination with at least an hour's worth of fuel remaining. Captain Frank Griffin, the pilot of the plane that flew out ahead of the Star Tiger, landed in Bermuda without encountering any major turbulence, icing, electrical storms, or other weather-related problems. But McMillan went radio silent, and the Star Tiger was never seen or heard from again. An intensive 5-day search amid worsening weather failed to turn up any sign of the aircraft. While it's pretty obvious that the plane crashed, its whereabouts and the reason for the accident remain a mystery to this day. Even if one of the aircraft's engines had failed, it should have been able to reach Bermuda. An investigation concluded that a mechanical failure was unlikely to be the cause for the disaster. It's possible that flying into a gale caused the plane to consume more fuel than expected, even after factoring in the weather, causing it to run out of fuel and plunge into the Atlantic. Investigators have also suggested that the crew may have forgotten they were flying at a low altitude and may have miscalculated their descent, especially if they were fatigued. This could have also easily caused the plane to crash. Around the time the Star Tiger should have been approaching Bermuda, the captain of a merchant ship reported seeing a low-flying plane with blinking lights halfway between Bermuda and Delaware Bay. This raises the troubling possibility that the plane was much further off course than its crew realized. And of course, there are theories about the aircraft falling victim to the alleged supernatural powers of the Bermuda Triangle. But the only certainty about the missing flight is that nobody knows what happened to it or where it ended up, leaving the Star Tiger's fate shrouded in mystery to this day. Would you rather survive a plane crash landing in the jungle where rescue teams wouldn't find you for 2 weeks, or float on a small boat in the middle of the ocean for 2 weeks? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.